Well, hello there again, everybody. Brandon here, coming to you with another quick painting tutorial. This one, a little bit of a request from someone commenting on one of my previous videos, wanting to see something from a sunflower. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a little simple, basic sunflower here scene. If you're new to the channel, if you like what you're seeing, please subscribe. Let's go take a look at this one now. Alright, so what I have here is another 6x8 gallery wrapped canvas. You see me use a lot of these. I like these because they can stand up on their own on a surface or hang on the wall. Starting with my 1-inch flat wash brush here. And I'm just going to go into, and this is my palette, by the way. Somebody commented, said they wanted to see my palette and color mixing, and I warned them it wasn't anything fancy. I'm going into a little bit of phthalo blue here and a little bit of white. These are acrylics. I've sprayed a little water on here, and I've got some wax paper underneath this that I'm mixing on. And I'm just going to come in here now with this mostly titanium white, a little bit of phthalo blue, create a little bit of a distant sky background is what we're going for here in this scenario. I want it a little bit darker in the corners than what is going on down low near the horizon here, so I'm going to work in a little bit more white right here at this horizon, brighten things up a bit here, and then bring a little bit more of the blue back in as I get up to the top edge up here, especially these top corners. I want them to be the darkest, so I'm just working this color back and forth. Again, if you're working acrylics and you're having any trouble making these things move around a little bit, I sprayed mine with a little bit of water out of a spray bottle onto my piece of a mess palette there. Helps them move around. And once I get everything pretty much looking the way I want, it's just a matter of adding in a little bit more blue on these top corners, again, because I want these to be the darkest. And of course, if you're painting this and you want to create a different type of sky, that's obviously entirely up to you. You can put clouds up here if you want. You can do an early morning or a sunset or something. I just like the way that the plain kind of blue looking background sky and horizon contrasts with these sunflowers doing a scene like this. So I'm not going to get carried away at all with what the sky's got going on. I'm just going to leave it as is here. Now for the rest of my background here, I'm going into a little bit of this sap green, a little touch of raw umber in here, maybe a hint of white, and a tad bit of black to gray it out, so the distant is not nearly as saturated with color here. So this stuff that's the furthest away, I don't want to be as saturated with color. Give us a little bit of an idea that there is some three-dimensionality to what we're trying to paint here. If you make the stuff that's further away not nearly as saturated with color, it'll give you a little bit of that illusion. Technically, things that are further away from you start to look more and more of the color of the horizon, so you could work a little bit of that blue into that if you wanted. I don't think it's necessary for this particular painting, so I'm just desaturating those further away colors, and then as I move forward here, I'm going back into more green and more of the raw umber. As it gets closer to us now, the saturated colors will make it appear that it's just a lot closer to us now. Ultimately here in the bottom of the canvas foreground, I'm even going to bring in some black to really darken it up as it's near the bottom of this canvas, because we're going to be putting one big sunflower right in the middle here, and we want to kind of create the shadows and illusion that there's some you know, a whole field of sunflowers here behind it. So down in here, I'm going to bring in some of that black. And you'll see that I'm just kind of scrubbing my brush around, turning it a little bit, making, you know, a little bit of different textures that are apparent if you look at this painting in person. It probably doesn't translate or pick up too well through the video, but you just have to take my word for it there and there. Ultimately here I'm just going for complete color coverage, and then we'll come back and start working in some of our sunflower field details. You can kind of see on the right edge there some of the textures that are being created by me turning and manipulating this brush, adding a little bit more black in some areas. It's just going to give it a little bit of variety of shadows, darks, and lights. Now I'm moving to a 1/4 inch angled brush here, and I'm going to go straight into some yellow ochre and maybe a touch of this raw umber in there with it. And I'm going to start putting in what could be just distant sunflower blooms here. So I'm not looking for anything specific. I'm just touching in a little bit of this color in random places here that are going to be far away, but where you might just start be picking up some color of what could be a sunflower bloom off in the distance. So I'm just going to randomly put maybe a little bit more of this yellow ochre in here. As you see, the color gets a little saturated. It's going to make these blooms appear a little closer to the foreground here. So not as much raw umber in it now. And immediately these areas look like they are a little closer to the viewer, a little more into the foreground. Still want my edges to be a little bit soft because I want these things to look, you know, somewhat like they're out of focus back there. I'm not trying to create any real sharp lines if possible. And these things could be at a variety of angles back there, so don't worry about making everything like a perfect circle sunflower bloom, because they're going to be turned all manner of which way out there. I'm going to put in just a touch there, just a touch of that red into my mix that I've been working with, and go into some of these areas with that, just to vary things up a little bit. I just like to make a change every now and then with the color that I'm using. I think in the end result adds a little something to it if you don't have everything out there obviously so monotone. So I just switched it up a tad bit by introducing a tiny bit of red into my mix. Make things a little bit more on the orange scale there. Now I'm brightening up a few of these with a little more yellow ochre that I've got on the canvas here that I want to make a little more distinct. You'll find that once you start putting things on the canvas that you want to change a few things once you've got them out there. So there's a couple here that I want to brighten up a little bit and make them look a little bit closer. And again, I'm doing that by introducing a little more saturated color. And some of these that are getting the closest to the foreground, I may even go back in here and try to put, you know, the center area, the darker area of the flower itself, maybe even a little bit of the yellow petals to it. We'll go into some yellow here. This is just a medium yellow. Maybe touch it around the outer edges of this thing that's the closest to us, just to start giving us the appearance of a sunflower out there. Again, these are meant to be a little bit away from us and not as in focus, so I'm not getting too concerned about my exactness here or my level of detail. We're just trying to give the impression that there's another sunflower in the field living over here that's a little closer to us so we can see just maybe a touch more detail in. Fairly happy with the way this one's looking. I'm going to darken up this center of it just a tad. Give me a little contrast there. That's pretty good. I'm fairly pleased with how that one looks. And you know, again, you can create as many of these as you want or as few of these as you want. I think I'm going to put a little bit of the same outer yellow perimeter on some of these over here, but I'm not going to kind of make it seem that they're still out of focus and further away. I'm not going to make individual petal marks on these. I'm just going to paint the perimeter of them with this brighter yellow. We wouldn't necessarily be able to make out individual petals on these that are further away, but you would be able to possibly see this color difference between the outer edges and the internal part of the flower. So I'm just going to drop in some of this indication. We're going to follow a similar methodology here for putting in the different stems and leaves. I'm going to move into green now. Just bring some of this sap green, some of this yellow together. See what kind of value that gets me on the canvas. These that are closer to us, we'd be able to make out a little bit more of the stems and leaves. So I'll put on a few random marks here when I've got fresh paint on the brush on these that are the closest to us for right now. So we'll be able to see a little bit of what's going on there. And then as my brush kind of loses some of this paint here, I can start moving into these that are a little bit further away. Just make some random marks and touches out here. We can only kind of see bits and pieces of these where the light's touching it. So just kind of randomly drop in some of this green color where we may have a variety of things out here that are catching some sunlight. These are kind of packed in, so there's a lot of shade in here too. So you definitely don't want to kill all your dark. In fact, I'm going to probably leave more dark than anything in this. I'm just turning this angled brush, making some random marks out here to give the illusion of leaves and stems. I'm not worried about the center part, obviously, because we're about to put a giant sunflower right here in this middle. So I'm not as concerned about that. This here now will give you an idea. I picked the camera up to show you this at a different angle. This is where we're sitting right now, so you can see that we've got, you know, a few flowers on the edges that look a little further away in the distance. Some look a little closer. Again, we've controlled that by our saturations and how much detail we're putting in it. Now we're going to come into back to this. I think I'm just going to use mostly yellow ochre here in this area where I've been mixing. This is not real crucial, but we're going to draw in our basic outline of our main flower. And so I am going to do individual petal shapes here to define where this flower is going to go. And I'm probably going to have to come back and adjust some of this once I get a lot of it on the canvas to kind of see what the overall shape is looking like. I'm not working off of any kind of pencil sketch this time. I'm just kind of freehanding this one as I'm going. So if I don't get the exact shape that I'm looking for, that's okay. I can go back and adjust it as long as I err on the not big enough side. It's always easier to broaden these things and cover more canvas with paint than it is to try to erase stuff, obviously. So I'm going to try to make it perhaps smaller than what I want first, and then go back and broaden things out if I want it larger. Not worried about any kind of detail here. I'm just painting in a basic yellow ochre outline of the edges of this thing, and then we're going to come back and worry about doing all the details later. I know over here on the left edge I want the flower to reach to about that point. Same way over here on the right, I want it to reach out to about that point. So I'm just kind of defining where I'm going. And down here at the bottom, somewhere in there is probably where I want the bottom of it to go. So that kind of gives me my four corners, so to speak. Can kind of work this like a clock face maybe, and put in the main pieces here first, and then fill in the rest once I kind of get the idea of where I want it to be. Each one of these petal strokes is mainly taking the tip of this angle brush and starting the petal, and then just kind of applying pressure as I move down and turn the brush a little bit. You can kind of create that tapered petal look in one motion. And if you like working with a lot of texture, you can certainly put petal texture in here by leaving some heavier bits of paint along one edge. I think we're starting to get a pretty good basic shape here of what this flower is going to look like. I feel like I need to fill in a lot of gaps out here. These sunflowers tend to have lots of petals that overlap and create a fairly thick outer perimeter. So I got some gaps in here I think I need to fill in. Just keep working your way around until you have a full, complete, close to a circle, I guess, or however, whatever angle you're wanting to paint your flower at. I'm going to make this one look fairly straight on, as if we were focusing a picture right on this one particular bloom. Feel like I need to move this left edge out just a little bit. It's not quite, my flower looks a little scrunched from this direction. I think I need to widen it out. This is what I was referring to earlier. I said I can always, it's easier to make it bigger in this sense than trying to erase something if I went too big. So I can come out here and add some paint now and broaden that side out a little bit. Fill in a few more gaps. Move this edge out a little bit to help my circle shape a little better. Yeah, I like that a little better than what I had going on before. Now I'm going to come into a little bit of raw umber. Bring that into this mix that I've been using to start defining out the center of this. And just come in here and draw out a close to a circle, I guess, inner part of this flower. Some of those petals are still a little bit wet, but that's okay. You can drag that color around. We can go back and add more dark into this. I just want to define out the overall center portion of this flower. And we're going to end up doing all of our detailing with smaller brushes than what I'm working with now. And I'm trying to make this edge somewhat refined, but there's going to be shadows and gaps that are in here on this inner edge from these petals that I'll end up breaking up some of this with a smaller brush when we get into a little bit of the detailing. For right now, I'm just trying to give myself the basic shape that I'm after. Now I'm going to go into this area with a little bit more green and paint in some of these petals and things that are coming off of this close flower here. So this is a lot of that yellow ochre I was working with, moved in some green in here, painting in kind of maybe where the stem is, a couple of leaves that are hanging off. We'll put a little bit of highlight on these too, since they're going to be the closest things to us. Just drop in a few things. We'll make these the most saturated in color. Put in a little bit of highlight here. I've added a little bit of yellow to brighten things up right on the tops of these. Okay, now I've gone into a little bit more yellow ochre to fill in a couple of gaps here. I took a quick break, so some of this is dried now. Coming back in here, filling in a couple of gaps. I see some areas that some petals coming off of here I want to fill in with. Sometimes when you stop in the middle of a project, come back to it, you see something you want to change, that's okay. We have the ability to do that, obviously. I want to refine my edges a little bit here. Gone into more raw umber. And I'm just going to paint out this center portion just a little bit further. I like that a little better. I darkened up the perimeter of that a little bit. And again, we're going to come in with some smaller brushes here and do some detailing out anyway. Now I've gone into a little more of my medium yellow value, and I'm going to come in here and start highlighting out some individual petals here over that yellow ochre. Just brightening up the yellow here, obviously. This is where you can start to kind of create individual shapes of each petal, because you're going to have, you know, petals that are behind and overlapping here and doing a variety of things, so you can kind of decide where you want the brightest highlights to hit. I try to, in my mind here, I'm saying that my light source here, the sun, is probably almost directly overhead, shining on this flower from the front, so where my shadows are going to fall are mostly going to be on just the back edges of some of these that are overlapping, and then as I move down the flower on the underneath, or the lower side I should say, of some of these petals. So I'm going to leave just a little bit of that yellow ochre and that darker stuff on some of the edges of some of these petals, so it'll appear that they are behind some of the ones that are in front of them, and you're seeing a little bit of a shadow from the front one. So you'll notice there I left that little edge of yellow ochre shining through there, kind of working most of my yellow onto the left side of each of these petals here over here. And so maybe there's a little bit of a shadow being thrown from petal that's up front onto the one behind it. It'll start to make a little bit more sense as you start to fill these in and get all the way around the flower, and you can kind of look at it and say, all right, I feel like I know where my light source is at and where the shadows should be. And there are a lot of petals here, so you just have to take your time, move through, go to each one. But this whole process, we'll still be done with this in less than an hour, so start to finish, it's not bad, even though it is a lot of individual parts and pieces going on here with a little bit of detail that's going to be coming in at the end. This part of the process is going to be fairly repetitive here, redundant obviously, so I'm just going to keep moving through each petal, bringing in this yellow. As I move to this right side of the flower, I'm going to keep my brighter colors on the right edges so the shadows will be coming in from the left. Kind of the opposite of what I was doing on the other side of the flower. So I'm keeping my brighter highlights here on the right side of the individual petal that I'm trying to paint in, and leaving that exposed yellow ochre to be on that left edge where it looks like the shadow would be cast from the petal in front of it. Now that I'm getting to these petals that are kind of in the 3 o'clock position here, I'm going to keep my brighter highlights kind of on the lower portion of the petal to where that top edge is what's getting shaded by the petal above it. And some of this we can come back and rework a little bit with some final detailing passes. I'm going to move to a small spotter brush here after I get all this color put in, and go back in and add some other areas of darker contrast. So we're going to make another detailing pass or two beyond this anyway, so you don't have to get too concerned about whether or not this is, you know, exactly how you want this thing to look on this pass. I mean, I'm making it fairly close, but I can still go back and alter and change a few things, obviously. And again, now as I am approaching the 9 o'clock position over here on the left hand side of this, I'm going to start making my brighter highlights to the I guess what's the lower edge of each petal that's towards the bottom of the canvas. leaving my little bit of yellow ochre that's going to show through to be on the top edge of each petal, to be where the shadow from the other one might be falling on it. Alright, I've got my wash brush back up here now, and I'm going to make a little mix here for the center part of the flower. This is mostly yellow ochre, touch of raw umber. I put a little white in here, and I'm just going to touch the end of my wash brush in here to create a little bit of a grainy looking texture for the center part of this flower. Creating a little bit of a grainy texture here for the center part of this flower, so I'm just tapping the end of this wash brush here. I'm going to move into green now and vary this color up a little bit. Got a little bit of green here in the center, kind of where the new stuff is coming out. It's got a little bit more green to it on a flower like this, I guess. Now I'm adding a little bit of red in here. Gonna orange this thing out a little bit of red into my mix, a little bit more yellow ochre. Start touching around. Again, it's just more interesting when you vary up your colors a little bit, so I don't want the inside of this thing looking all the same color. And we'll put a few highlight passes and some detail in on this stuff as well. A little bit more yellow ochre now. Move to the outer edges of this, and again, this is just tapping and dotting, creating kind of a grainy looking texture. You can use whatever brush you feel is most qualified for you to do this. I just like the end of my little wash. This is kind of a worn out wash brush. The bristles are about half the length that they were when this brush was new, so it's good for tapping and dabbing here. Now I'm moving into this small spotter brush. This is a little 10-aught spotter brush, so I can come in here and do some detail work. We can kind of define some things out. Going into mostly raw umber here, a little bit of black, and we're going to start to draw along these edges and kind of carve out where these petals are attached to the center of the flower, because they kind of come to little points here, and you know, each little petal kind of comes into a point as it approaches the center. And you don't have to go around and define every single one of these, but I'm going to come around and do a fair amount of them. And then, you know, some of these places where I want some extra contrast of shadow, I'll extend these lines out along the edge of the flower, or excuse me, out along the edge of each petal. For right now, it's about breaking up this edge a little bit and just kind of piecing out some individual petals in here in terms of their point of attachment. I just don't want the perimeter of this center part of the flower to be a perfect sharp circle edge. You know, you want to come in here and break this up a little bit. And you can work that dark color, you can tap it in, obviously creating little effects and details into the inner part of the flower as well. And then just kind of work that darker color anywhere you want to create a little bit more contrast, a little bit more shadow. Right underneath some of the edges of some of these petals where there's a little bit more shadow. Alright, I had to take another quick pause there, but let's go back to what we were doing. This is still the spotter brush. I'm working with some raw umber in with a little bit of yellow ochre. This is not just pure raw umber here, but I'm using this spotter brush to bring this darker color in, creating some little bit more contrast between my darks and lights here, drawing in some more shadows and defining out exactly how some of these petals are laying as they overlap each other and attach to the center point here. So just kind of look at it, and maybe you have to step back from it and get an idea of where you want individual ones to be, but I'm just kind of dropping in some dark stuff as I go, mostly focusing on where I have left that raw umber, or excuse me, where I left that yellow ochre shining through from before when we were putting in the yellow highlights. So I already know where basically I want all of my shadows to be. So I'm just dragging a little bit of this darker color into those places. Maybe not all the way out, maybe not covering all of it. I mean, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Just introducing it here and there. Down in here closer to the center point of the flower where things are packed in a little tighter, you're just going to see more shadows and contrasts. So that's why I'm trying to focus most of my efforts towards the inner part here as they're attaching to the center of the flower. And you do as much of this as you want or as little as you want, whatever makes you happy. There's no set rule here on how much shadowing and contrasting you have to do. You don't have to do any if you don't want to, but this is my methodology for painting one of these. So this is how in my mind, this is how I create one. You certainly could have created these attachment points with these petals from the beginning if you really wanted to take the time to taper each petal brushstroke as you approach the center. But that's just not my method. I like to come back here and create things with my detailing and shadowing here on the final stages. So and again, you can bring this darker color in and start putting some splotches and dots all in here in this interior, because there's a lot of shadows going on in the center part of this flower. I'm just going to make a lot of small individual little marks here to break this up. And we'll make a few highlight passes in here as well with some brighter color. Just kind of go back and forth between the two. I'm going to come in here and add a little bit of white into my yellow ochre mix here on the top. And towards the center here, we're going to start tapping in some little brighter highlight pieces. Just kind of work those around. Kind of another area where you can do as little or as much of this as you want. But I think we're arriving at a pretty good spot. And ultimately, I'm going to call that one a finished product. Obviously, again, you can keep detailing these things out as much as you want, but you know, when you step back from this, it actually looks pretty good to me. I think I've accomplished what I set out to do here, and that's create a sunflower scene with a main focus here in the middle of a big individual sunflower. So if you painted along with that one, I hope you got something you're happy with. Until next time, happy painting, everybody.